In this episode, we're going to explore macOS security features, not as a list of brand names to memorize, but as a set of protective ideas that work together to reduce common risks. Even if you are not a daily macOS user, understanding these features helps you recognize how modern operating systems try to protect everyday computers from malware, unsafe apps, and data theft. The key idea is that macOS has multiple layers that aim to stop untrusted software from running, limit what software can do if it runs, protect critical parts of the system from being modified, and keep data safe if the device is lost or stolen. We'll focus on four major concepts: Gatekeeper, System Integrity Protection, SIP, Sandboxing, and Encryption. Each one addresses a different part of the security problem, and the real strength comes from how they overlap. By the end, you should be able to explain what each feature is trying to accomplish, what threats it helps with, and why none of them should be treated as a single magic shield. A good way to start is to recognize that operating systems face a constant tension between openness and safety. People want to install software easily, customize their systems, and run tools that fit their needs, but attackers want the same freedom for malicious code. macOS tries to manage this tension by creating a safer default path for typical users, while still allowing advanced use under controlled conditions. This is not unique to Apple, but macOS is known for a tightly integrated approach where the hardware, operating system, and software distribution model work together. For beginners, it helps to think of macOS security as a set of rules that answer questions like, where did this app come from? Has it been altered? Does it have permission to access sensitive resources? And can it modify the core operating system? Each layer is a different answer to one of those questions, and understanding the questions is often more useful than memorizing the technical details. Gatekeeper is primarily about controlling what software is allowed to run and giving users safer defaults when they download apps from the internet. At a high level, Gatekeeper checks whether an app comes from a known developer identity and whether it has been properly signed, which means the app carries a cryptographic mark that ties it to a developer and helps detect tampering. This matters because one common malware path is to trick users into running software that looks legitimate, or to modify a legitimate app after it is downloaded. Gatekeeper helps reduce that risk by warning or blocking when software does not meet trust expectations. A beginner misconception is that Gatekeeper is an antivirus, but it is better described as a trust and integrity gate. It does not guarantee that software is safe, but it raises the bar by making it harder for unknown or altered software to run quietly. To understand why Gatekeeper helps, imagine the difference between receiving a sealed product from a reputable manufacturer and receiving a loose item in an unmarked bag. The sealed product could still be defective, but the seal provides accountability and makes tampering easier to detect. In macOS terms, code signing and verification create that seal. When software is signed, the operating system can check that the code has not changed since it was signed, and it can tie that signature to a developer identity that can be revoked or distrusted if abused. Gatekeeper also interacts with the idea of quarantine, where files downloaded from certain sources are treated with extra caution. This is why the operating system can show warnings when you open something you just downloaded. For beginners, the key lesson is that macOS tries to insert a moment of friction when software arrives from an untrusted path, because that friction prevents silent execution and gives users a chance to avoid obvious traps. System Integrity Protection, shortened to System Integrity Protection, SIP, is about protecting the operating system itself from being modified, even by powerful processes. Historically, if malware or a misbehaving program gained administrative privileges, it could change system files, replace important utilities, or install persistent components deep in the operating system. SIP reduces that risk by marking certain system locations and behaviors as off-limits, so even highly privileged actions are constrained. This is important for beginners because it introduces a modern security idea. Administrative privileges are not the same as unlimited power. macOS intentionally limits what even administrators can do to core system areas, because the operating system wants to preserve its own integrity. The practical effect is that attackers have a harder time turning a one-time compromise into a deeply persistent one that survives updates and reboots. SIP is also a good example of defense against both malicious activity and accidental damage. People make mistakes, and powerful commands or installers can cause harm when they modify critical system components. By protecting core areas, SIP prevents many forms of accidental self-inflicted damage, which indirectly improves security because a broken system is harder to patch, monitor, and trust. From an attacker's perspective, a system that cannot be easily modified at the deepest layers is frustrating because many stealth techniques rely on altering system behavior. Attackers may still find ways to persist, such as using user-level launch mechanisms or exploiting vulnerabilities, but SIP forces them away from the simplest path of rewriting system binaries. For beginners, this is a big conceptual win. Security is often about removing easy paths to harm, so attackers must take more complicated routes that are harder to execute and easier to detect. Sandboxing addresses a different part of the problem, which is limiting what software can do after it runs. Even well-intentioned software can have vulnerabilities, and users sometimes run software that is not malicious but is still risky. A sandbox is like placing an app in a controlled environment where it can only access certain files, devices, and system resources unless it is granted additional permission. This reduces the damage if the app is compromised, because the attacker inherits the app's restricted environment rather than gaining full access to everything on the computer. For a beginner, the most important way to understand sandboxing is as a containment strategy. Instead of betting everything on preventing compromise, sandboxing assumes compromise might happen and focuses on limiting the blast radius. This is a core modern security idea that shows up in many places beyond macOS. Permissions and user consent often work alongside sandboxing because the operating system wants access to sensitive resources to be explicit. This is why modern systems ask for permission when an app wants access to locations like documents, the camera, the microphone, or other privacy-sensitive areas. The sandbox establishes a default boundary, and permissions provide controlled exceptions when legitimate functionality requires it. Beginners sometimes find permission prompts annoying, but they are a key signal that an app is crossing a boundary. If an app that claims to be a simple utility suddenly requests access to broad files or privacy-sensitive devices, that is a reason to pause and question intent. Sandboxing is not perfect, and attackers sometimes find ways around boundaries, but it significantly reduces the success of many common attacks that rely on unrestricted access once code is running. Encryption is the layer that focuses on protecting data, especially when the device is lost, stolen, or physically accessed by someone who should not have it. On macOS, encryption is often associated with full disk encryption, which means the data on the storage device is unreadable without proper authentication. The beginner-friendly idea is simple. If an attacker steals a laptop, they may not need to hack the operating system at all if they can simply read the drive. Encryption makes that direct reading much harder because the data is stored in a form that looks like random noise without the decryption keys. This is a different threat model than malware, but it is just as important because physical loss is common and can lead to major data exposure. Encryption turns physical possession into a less powerful advantage for an attacker. The security value of encryption depends on key protection, which means how the system stores and uses the secrets that unlock the data. Modern devices often use hardware support to protect keys and to ensure that decryption is tied to correct authentication. For beginners, you do not need to know the chip-level details to understand the key point. Encryption works best when the keys are not easily extracted and when unlocking requires something the legitimate user controls, like a strong device password. Another important idea is that encryption does not stop all data theft. If the device is unlocked and malware runs, it may still be able to access decrypted data through the user's normal access. Encryption mainly protects data at rest, meaning data stored on disk when the system is locked or powered off. That distinction helps you avoid the misconception that encryption automatically stops software attacks. These features overlap in a way that creates stronger defense than any single one could provide alone. Gatekeeper reduces the chance that untrusted or tampered apps run in the first place, which lowers the number of risky events you face. Sandboxing and permissions reduce the damage when apps run, especially if they are vulnerable or abused. SIP protects the operating system core from being modified, which helps prevent deep persistence and stealthy tampering. Encryption protects data if the physical device is lost or accessed without proper authentication. Notice how each layer targets a different stage: before execution, during execution, system integrity, and data protection at rest. That layered model is a good mental template you can reuse when you study other platforms, because strong security usually comes from multiple controls that cover different failure modes. As you become more comfortable with macOS security concepts, you will also become better at evaluating security claims in general. If someone says a platform is secure, you can ask what it does to control software trust, how it limits application behavior, how it protects critical system components, and how it protects stored data. You can also recognize where the boundaries are and where they are not. Gatekeeper does not guarantee software is safe. SIP does not stop all forms of persistence. Sandboxing does not eliminate vulnerabilities, and encryption does not protect data that is already accessible in an unlocked session. Security is about reducing probabilities and limiting impact, not about achieving perfection. The main beginner goal is to understand what each feature is designed to prevent, so you can reason about which threats are still possible and what additional layers might be needed in different situations. By understanding Gatekeeper, SIP, sandboxing, and encryption, you are learning how a modern operating system tries to defend users in practical ways. These features reflect a philosophy of safe defaults, constrained privileges, and layered protection that reduces the chance of easy compromise and reduces the damage when compromise occurs. When you view them as concepts rather than brand names, you can carry the ideas into other environments, because the same patterns show up in Linux hardening, Windows policy, and even container controls. macOS is a clear example of an ecosystem that tries to make secure behavior the default, while still allowing flexibility through deliberate choices. The best takeaway is that security features are most effective when users understand what they do and cooperate with them through good habits, like paying attention to trust prompts, using strong authentication, and keeping systems updated. When those habits align with the platform's built-in protections, the result is a system that is meaningfully harder to misuse.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.